Good evening. If everyone could wrap up your conversations. Thank you, Janet. Hi, everyone. Hi. Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for joining the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, the Department of Planning and Development, members of our Economic Development Advisory Board, and our consultants, North Star Planning and Camoin Associates, for the second in a series of community conversations that will help shape the Yarmouth Comprehensive Plan update. If you're not familiar with comprehensive planning or didn't attend last week, a comprehensive plan is a document with a long-range view that guides municipal growth, policy, and investment over the next 10 to 20 years. The planning process incorporates community's vision and values along with the latest data on topics such as housing, transportation, recreation, economy, historic resources, and fiscal health. Our last comprehensive plan was adopted in 2010, so it's time to move on to an updated document. And I just realized I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Erin Zwerko. I'm the Director of Planning and Development. And tonight, we're here to dive deeper into Yarmouth's economy, market analysis, and local issues. The feedback that we received tonight will help the department, our consultants, and the steering committee narrow in on those high-level goals that we can use to then develop strategies and actions. So tonight, following a presentation from Tom Doretsky and a brief Q&A, we will divide into guided tables. You've already done that. Table conversations and activities for about 45 minutes. The goal of this series of activities is to have community members consider how the town should approach different economic goals. There are reference materials at each table, and there are also some large format maps in the back corner that were taken from the draft inventory chapters that can be viewed and used for reference. At the completion of the table activities, we'll reconvene and ask each table to report out regarding their findings. There are also refreshments in the front corner, and please help yourself. There are restrooms through the double doors at the back of the room. And then please also consider participating in the other stations around the room. There's 2 against that wall and 1 along with the refreshments. So this is the second in a series of 3 community conversations. So I hope that you would all please consider joining us on October 2nd in this room to discuss the environment and natural resources, all of which will lead into the Future Land Use Forum on November 13th, also here at Patriot Insurance. If you aren't able to attend our next events, you can join the discussion online at planyarmouth.com. There's also links from the town's website. Each of the events will be adapted for online participation. And finally, thank you to Patriot Insurance for, again, allowing us to hold these community conversations in their great meeting space. We definitely appreciate it and hope to continue that through this series. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom to take us through the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Erin. Good evening, everyone. As Erin said, my name is Tom Doretsky. I'm the Director of Research at Camoin Associates. Camoin Associates is an economic development firm. We've been around since 1999. We've got about 25 employees, 4 of which live in Maine. We do a lot of work here in Maine and are very familiar with the southern Maine market. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about Yarmouth tonight. As you all probably know, a real estate market analysis has been conducted for this project. It's posted online, and if you're interested in more details around methodology and approach and how we got to some of these conclusions we'll be talking about tonight, I encourage you to take a look at that. The purpose of kind of this presentation and the market analysis generally is really just to kind of understand what the market opportunities are for residential and commercial development here in town. It's not to prescribe what the town should do or should develop. It's just merely there to understand what the potential opportunities are. And it kind of lays the groundwork for strategies and policies around economic development that will result from this planning effort. So we will kind of jump into the beginning of the presentation here. So we'll start with some key demographic and economic trends, and then we'll move into some of the real estate market condition takeaways and finish off with some key findings and framing of economic issues that kind of have risen to the top so far. And then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and then we'll move on to the group activities. So starting with some demographic indicators here, the town has about 9,000 people in population. It's been growing at about the same pace as the southern Maine region, and the southern Maine region has grown significantly faster than the rest of Maine in recent years, with the population growth being heavily concentrated in the southern part of the state. The median age here in Yarmouth is 49.4 years old. It's a bit older than the region as a whole. The region, kind of the Portland metro region, which includes Cumberland and York counties, that median age is about 44, so it's about 5 years older in Yarmouth, and that's largely due to the affordability of housing here in the town. So because housing is pricier here than other communities in the region, there's limited potential for younger individuals, younger households to find housing here, and so that's why you kind of see an older median age. Median household income also kind of reflects that. It's just above $100,000 compared to about $78,000 in the Portland metro and $64,000 in the state. Commuter trends are interesting to look at to kind of understand the flows of people in and out of the town for working purposes. So there's actually a similar number of resident workers, that is people that live in Yarmouth and hold jobs, as there are people that are employed at jobs in Yarmouth. So there's about similar number of resident workers to workers employed in Yarmouth. That doesn't mean those are the same people. In fact, there's a lot of kind of cross-commuting in and outside of Yarmouth. You've got about 85% of workers employed in Yarmouth who are coming from outside the town, and also about 85% of employed residents commute out of Yarmouth for work. That's not really unusual for a small community. You kind of tend to have a lot of cross-commuting, but it can also indicate a mismatch between the type of housing available in the community and the types of jobs that are here in town. After Yarmouth, the highest share of workers that work in Yarmouth come from Portland, about 10%. And on the flip side, Portland is also the top destination of Yarmouth residents who commute for work. About 28% of Yarmouth residents commute to Portland. Related to this, there's also quite a high share of people that work remotely in Yarmouth. Those stats have kind of been changing rapidly as COVID has kind of evolved, but according to the latest data for Cumberland County as a whole, the Yarmouth data lags a bit, but for the data that we do have, Yarmouth kind of tracked Cumberland County generally in years prior, so we can kind of conclude these stats probably apply to Yarmouth to some degree. Prior to COVID in 2019, Cumberland County had about 7% of people that were working from home on any given day. The latest stats from 2022 show that's about 22%. So it's about 3 times higher than it was. It did drop slightly from 21 to 22, as you might expect. 21 was 26%, 22 is 22%. So Yarmouth, the numbers will lag a bit, but prior to COVID, they were similar to Cumberland, so I think we can probably draw a similar pattern for Yarmouth specifically. On to job trajectory. This graph is showing the percent change in jobs from about 20 years ago, 2002. The top line is Yarmouth. So we're seeing about, since 20 years ago, about 22% increase in the number of jobs in the town. You can see that's significantly outpaced some of these comparison regions, Cumberland County, the Portland Metro, and Maine. And we'll take a look at some of those industries on the next slide. You can see in 2020 there is a dip across all geographies. That is obviously due to COVID. And as of 2022, the job numbers have just about recovered to that pre-COVID peak. And as we get the 2023 data, we're probably just about back to full employment. This graph shows the top growing and also top lagging industries. This is specifically over the last 5 years from 2017 in terms of number of jobs that were added. So the industrial sector that gained the most jobs over that 5-year period was professional, scientific, and technical services. And that's kind of a catch-all category that includes a lot of different occupations and industries. Some of the ones that are driving specifically in Yarmouth are architectural and engineering services, scientific research and development, consulting services, legal services, and advertising and PR. Those were kind of the biggest contributors to that first category. Others that gained were agriculture and also construction. And then on the flip side, the biggest kind of losers, so to speak, were government, accommodation and food services, and retail trade. And retail trade and accommodation and food services, that's kind of a common story in the years kind of during COVID. We saw a drop in those kind of across the country. So that's not really unique to Yarmouth. Kind of a summary here of the key assets and strengths of the town. Obviously, there's a high quality of life here. People want to live in Yarmouth, and they pay a premium to do so. Coastal access and outdoor recreation, safe and desirable neighborhoods, strong school district, walkable downtown. Those all kind of contribute to the strength of the residential market, which we'll talk about in a second. You have direct access to I-295 and Route 1, which are important for commercial development, whether that's retail, office, industrial, all of those things really rely on that transportation access. You've got short commutes to job centers, both in Portland and Brunswick, and close proximity to all the amenities and services that Portland has. Next, we'll talk about some of the real estate market takeaways. So first, we'll talk about residential. For those that were participated in the housing discussion, these were probably explored in much more depth, so we'll just kind of briefly touch on them. So we know Yarmouth is predominantly owner-occupied. There's opportunity for additional owner-occupied units and as well as rental units here in the town. We know there's strong market rate housing demand. And what we mean by market rate housing is housing that a developer would be able to develop without any kind of public subsidy or program. And in order to do that in Yarmouth, you're going to be delivering units at fairly high price points. You can see from this chart here what the median single family home sale price is in Yarmouth. Yarmouth is that top line there. So in 2022, that median sale price was above $800,000. Quite a bit above the neighboring communities. North Yarmouth and Freeport and Cumberland all came in around $600,000. So Yarmouth kind of is at the high end of this kind of localized area here. And so those are kind of the price points of market rate units that are likely to be delivered, around that kind of price point. That's not to say there isn't strong demand for below market units as well, affordable units, workforce units, and so forth. This analysis really focused on the market kind of demand, but that's not to say that there's strong, significant demand for those types of units as well. On the retail side of things, you've also got this map at your tables. This is what we call a retail trade area. And so in black, the black outline here, this is the town of Yarmouth. And then the orange kind of overlay area is what we call the retail trade area. And that trade area is what that means is it's the primary customer draw area for Yarmouth retail businesses. It's the area from which most customers that shop in Yarmouth are coming from. We know, the main retail nodes in Yarmouth are primarily Main Street, and where there's small scale, more local retail, as well as Route 1, which has some of the chain retail, as well as the local businesses. The Yarmouth trade area is relatively small as far as trade areas go. It really serves Yarmouth and North Yarmouth for the most part. That's where the businesses in Yarmouth generally draw their customers. They're more local serving. They focus more on kind of everyday purchases, grocery, pharmacy, personal care, haircuts, restaurants, fitness, those kinds of things that you're typically not traveling that far to do. For more kind of larger, more infrequent purchases, residents are typically leaving this trade area and going either to Falmouth or Freeport or Portland or Brunswick for more specialized things as well. So what does that mean? Relatively small trade area. There's an opportunity for more small scale retail and restaurants, kind of building on the types of businesses that are already doing well in the town. That might be restaurants and cafes, boutiques, clothing, household goods, small grocery and specialty foods. And then there is some potential to recapture some of that resident spending that's flowing outside of the town currently, that spending that goes to Falmouth or other communities. But it would be kind of a stretch, shall we say, to attract kind of a large big box store. Not that that's necessarily something the community wants, but that's not what's currently in Yarmouth. It's not seen as like a regional node. And so the opportunity is more on the smaller scale sort of things, building on that mixed use walkable downtown. And that actually has some pretty strong visitor attraction potential as well. That kind of unique sense of place in the downtown can attract people that are interested in spending time there, shopping at some of the more specialized retail and boutique type stores. So there's potential there to recapture both resident spending as well as attract some visitors to the community. On the industrial side of things, industrial type employment in Yarmouth is concentrated in a few different industries, and recent growth has been specifically in construction and manufacturing, both of which use different types of industrial space. You got your construction contractors, your landscapers, your plumbers, those kinds of businesses that need certain types of industrial facilities, as well as some smaller scale manufacturing has seen some growth in the community. Across the region, there are very low vacancy rates for industrial space. It's been very much in demand over the last several years, approximately 262,000 square feet of new industrial space could be supported regionally. Yarmouth could capture a small percentage of that based on kind of its size and current capture rate. Some of the constraints around that, however, are the fact that the town is small in area, so there just aren't a lot of sites, and particularly sites that have that direct highway access that are most in demand by industrial users. And last kind of real estate use type here is office opportunities. Office is probably the sector that has the least amount of demand nationally. This has been the case coming out of COVID with kind of work from home really taking hold. And there is some plans for some planned expansions at Garmin, which will potentially use some more office space. But in terms of just kind of developing an office property speculatively, there's probably not that much demand there. Some demand for medical office we've seen, but the greatest opportunity in office is probably kind of some kind of version of smaller scale workspace, focusing on kind of that remote work potential, whether that's a co-working facility or some other version of that where folks who work from home either all the time or some of the time can kind of rent some space on an hourly basis or a daily basis and take advantage of that. And so the office space that's doing the best kind of across the nation, regionally, anywhere really, is the high quality space. Your kind of more tired office space that needs a facelift or it's not in the best location, that's the space that's seeing the most vacancy. the kind of higher amenity space in environments that are walkable, where you can walk during the day to get a bite to eat or go to the gym. Those are the ones that will really outperform. So we can think about kind of how Yarmouth can capitalize on that, specifically with the downtown mixed use environment, very walkable, lovely place to be. There's probably some potential there for some small scale office space. And so just kind of key takeaways on the summary of development opportunity side: strong demand for residential units on the market rate side, both residential, both rental and for sale units. Small scale retail space has some potential, particularly in the downtown, but also on Route 1. Walkable collaborative workspaces for remote workers are probably the largest opportunity on the office side of things. And then on that industrial use side, there's some potential to prepare shovel-ready sites or identify certain properties that might be a good fit for the type of industrial that would fit well with kind of the character of the community. And finally, just kind of a summary of themes that have come up so far. And this is kind of a list that's in progress. I'm sure we'll be able to add some more issues tonight as things come up in your small groups. But these are kind of the issues that have risen to the top so far as they relate to Yarmouth's economy. So housing affordability is a concern for workforce availability, which is the second option. Having places for potential employees to live in the town impacts the ability for businesses to find workers that they need for their businesses. Opportunity for more retail service and entertainment in town is something that people have expressed interest in. Having less of that, what we talked about before, the retail leakage, having some more of those amenities and services here in town and not having to leave to do those. The next one around shovel-ready sites for development, as we just discussed. Residential for commercial versus commercial tax share is a big one as well. How much of the tax burden do we want the residents to shoulder versus the commercial businesses? And obviously there are trade-offs there to having more commercial businesses. So that's something, that would be considered in this comprehensive plan. Do we want to attract more commercial businesses that are net fiscally positive for the town, generating more tax revenue than they cost in services to kind of take away some of that burden from the residents? Or do we not want commercial in the town and we're fine, on the residential side shouldering more of that tax burden? There's no right or wrong answer to that, but it's something that should be considered. Growth potential for working waterfront. There aren't a lot of sites necessarily for working waterfront uses, but there's some potential there to foster some of those more specialized uses. On the arts side, the potential to use the arts as a catalyst for further economic development, whether that's for attracting more residents, whether that's attracting more visitors, and making Yarmouth even more of a desirable place to live. There's a lot of opportunity there. And then the last one's the future of Cousins Island, and specifically a Wyman Station. As most of you know, there's it's about 100 acres of industrial land that the future of which is kind of undetermined for now, but that's something that's come up as something on people's minds. So with that, we can open the floor for some Q&A.
So I'm Ben Smith from North Star Planning, and I'm going to walk around with a microphone. This is the only microphone that will come over the speakers. This is for the audio recording. So when you speak into this microphone, which I'll ask you to do, Tom will repeat the question into the microphone for everyone in the audience. Okay? So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions now, and depending on how things go for the breakout sessions, we could very well have some time for additional questions at the end. So I'll walk around when I see some hands, and we'll let Tom answer from the podium. Thanks.
Hi, Joyce Cassidy. Is it on?
It is on. It
Okay, great. I would just like if you could explain what is the current percentage of tax revenue that's provided by residential versus commercial, industrial, with a little bit of context, like what was it maybe 10 years ago?
So, Tom, I'm interested in the shared workspace possibility, and I'm only aware of one. There's a spot down on 88 near 295 under the overpass there. Are there other shared workspaces in town?
So I'm aware of that one. There might be a few others. I'm getting a no from Scott over there. Oh, sorry, I forgot to restate the question. Are there other shared workspaces here in town? It sounds like that's the only kind of formal one. There may be some kind of unofficial type one where businesses might have a spare office here and there that they might rent out to an individual, but that's the only one.
Yeah, and can you just talk about what you think the opportunity for growth is? I mean, has that been something that's been presented to the town planning group or anybody as far as, oh, I'd like to have that space available as opposed to going into Portland?
Yeah, so it's kind of early days for those kinds of discussions. There hasn't been a formal market study to that extent. But the fact, particularly on Main Street there, that's probably a place that people would want to be for office, the walkability there, the access to restaurants, some of the art amenities. That would probably be the opportunity to uncover there for office.
I can answer that a little bit. I'm Deb Wathen-Finn, the chair of the Economic Development Advisory Board. Just before COVID, we did a bunch of focus groups with remote workers, and we found that there was interest in what type of situation there would be. But obviously, COVID threw everything up in the air. But we have a meeting on October 20th? 20th on remote working. And we're reaching out through the chamber, Tim will help us, and people that we know that are working from home, because we're going back to that, because that's been identified as an issue through the advisory board and through market analysis. So there's been some interesting work. It's just that it had to get restarted post-COVID. But thank you for your interest in that.
I'll go to you. And next.
Thank you. Workforce availability. Have a general understanding that many of the small business closures that we've experienced, I'm thinking especially of retail food service establishments, have been attributable to just inability to obtain or retain staffing. And is there, and my understanding is that this continues to be true, is there any general understanding, has it been looked into, what are all of the factors that enter into this phenomenon and what's going on, and what might we be able to do about that?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a question about kind of what are the factors that impact the kind of worker shortage that a lot of businesses have been seeing locally, regionally. It's a national issue. So a couple different things have played into that. We saw as the pandemic hit, there were a lot of early retirements. So as that kind of large older generation kind of retired earlier than expected, that really compacted the overall workforce availability. And so since the onset of the pandemic, we've been dealing with these kind of ongoing workforce shortage issues. And so, unemployment is very low. The unemployment rate is very low. So there is some potential to bring other people back into the workforce, but not a lot, honestly. So, and within Maine we know is an older state. It's an aging state. Some of those issues are more acute here specifically as well. And it relates to the housing issue in a lot of communities as well. We know overall there's just a limited number of workers, and so it's kind of, in a sense, making communities compete for those types of workers. So communities that have housing that is affordable, they're probably going to have an easier time attracting workers to some of those moderate or lower wage positions than those that are far away from where workers can afford to live. So it's not an issue that's going away for sure. There are some things that can be done at the local level, specifically housing, to deal with that. But it's something that is going to play out over the long term nationally. Businesses are looking into automation as a solution to some extent, as much as that's possible. And so it's a challenge, and it's not something that Yarmouth is going to be able to fix, but it's kind of the economic reality that we have.
Chris Torina, I'm also on the EDAB board. No question here, just more of a comment, sort of kind of a segue into the facilitating the table activities here in a minute. But you mentioned a lot, several times COVID. I'm a product of COVID, coming over from the West Coast, coming all the way back east, being closer to family, young son. There's a large swath. I represent a large swath of young professionals or young families, late 30s, early 40s, that have come to Yarmouth, really have planted a flag with their children, with their family life, but also more importantly, with sort of work-life balance. The largest thing that, myself and a large part of the community that I represent find that we're losing a lot to Portland. We're particularly losing a lot of tax base to Freeport because the things that I don't want to say we expect to be sort of offered in a beautiful town like this isn't being offered is really driving us to spend what we would normally spend and want to spend here in town in other communities, benefiting those communities. So some of the things that are things that I want to discuss at my table today is really on the retail side, boutique offerings, things that we're losing out. No one in at least in I've been here about 2.5 years now, but I'm pretty active in the community, coach a lot of teams on EDAB, go to town council meetings, and really I feel that we are losing out a lot on tapping into the future of this community, what we're offering our children and those young folks that are coming in with children to really establish. I mean, we talk about residential or real estate cost of living or just the price of homes here, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. I don't want to say that type of person kind of expects certain things, but there's a lot of income that we're wasting, that we're driving to other communities. I really think we need to focus on bringing here, keeping here, that we're not currently doing, that is not industrial, that isn't commercial, but really is retail. And we have a huge benefit. I live in the village myself, right on Main Street, and I can tell you, every time I walk my dog up and down Main Street, I kind of envision the storefronts and envision a lot of foot traffic on the weekends and really driving those tax dollars down here, both here and also from other communities. So more of a comment than a question. Thanks.
I'll take a couple more.
It's one thing to talk about the kinds of businesses that we might like here. But if I were starting out for a business, I want to really know what is the demand for my services. I can't just start a business and hope people show up. I have to have some sense that they will. So where do I find really good information that could help me answer that question?
Sure. So question about information on the types of businesses that can be supported here based on spending potential. So that should all be in the market analysis. There's a section there about retail leakage, and it goes kind of category by category down the different types of retail businesses and shows what the demand is for those businesses based on the spending potential of residents of the trade area compared to existing sales of those businesses that are currently located in the trade area. So it identifies some specific gaps where there are potential for those businesses. So I in my presentation, I touched on a few of them, but there's a lot of detail in that market analysis.
Thanks. Kevin Hartnett. You kind of started to answer my question, which is to what extent are we kind of at capacity on like retail and kind of that type of establishment? I mean, we're like kind of a little boxed out of a working waterfront. We're not going to be like a major industrial player, but like to to what extent are we at capacity there? That's number one. And two, is it mainly should we be looking to recapture resident spending like Chris was talking about, or should we be trying to attract people as like some type of like regional hub? Kind of what do those two different profiles look like? And are there exemplars of either model, other towns that are kind of acing those things that we should be thinking about?
Sure. Yeah. Question about kind of what are the opportunities around recapturing spending potential versus attracting visitors and kind of the different directions that retail can go. So it's a good question. I talked about kind of the retail trade area being fairly small based on how it currently works, how the local economy currently works. That doesn't mean it always has to work like that. So kind of based on the existing spending of folks that live here, a lot of categories are kind of tapped out in a sense. So grocery, for example, you're not going to attract more people from outside the community to shop at your grocery store unless you have a more specialized offering. So one strategy could be to really focus on offering specific retail or specialized services that aren't offered somewhere else, or that where you do it better, where visitors want to come from outside to visit Yarmouth. Right, so that's certainly a potential. As I mentioned several times already, Main Street is a unique asset. That's a place that people want to be, that will come if there are kind of more things to go to on Main Street. People will come. You're within a fairly populated region, all the way from southern Maine all the way up to Brunswick and beyond. You're kind of centered in a good location. So if there's a reason to get off the highway, people will. It's not like you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So that's a strategy that could be certainly undertaken. There's potential to kind of, I don't want to say steal, but kind of steal spending from surrounding communities, right? Right. Localize your own or keep your own spending here and also attract from elsewhere. So there's a lot of potential, absolutely, to do that. Follow-up question?
We can do one more question,
Okay.
and then we'll go to the tables.
Just in comparing Yarmouth to our other competing towns, we'll say, are there things that they're doing in terms of zoning to encourage businesses that we need to look at?
So that's probably not something I can speak to as well. Sorry, there was a question about surrounding communities. Is there something that Yarmouth can do about zoning that would better position it to kind of emulate what are some of the surrounding communities are doing? I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but I imagine there probably are some differences in zoning. I don't know.
I think that there could be. I don't know that one of the things that we hope to get to through the table work and through this comprehensive planning effort is some really good ideas to implement some of the goals. And in order to implement some of the goals of the comprehensive plan, local ordinances would be reviewed. So, I'm not prepared. I don't think anyone's prepared to say, on page 47 of the land use ordinance, we need to change this or that. But I think that one of the very reasonable outcomes of a process like this is a review of the land use ordinance to make sure that the ordinances and the policies that are on the books match up with the goals and priorities of the community. So I think that that's actually a really good segue to some of the conversations that would be happening at the tables. We've kind of allocated about an hour or so to go through the table exercises. There's 3 exercises. Your facilitators, if you're a facilitator at the table, would you raise your hand, please? Just so everybody knows who their facilitator is and we can make sure every table has one. So the idea here is that we're going to go through some individual work and we're going to go through some table work and we're going to, bat some of these ideas around on should Yarmouth be a really, really good small local serving economy or should it grow into some larger regional role? Will the town actively encourage certain types of businesses or other types of businesses? So that's your task to think about and balance and what some of those trade-offs might be for the next hour or so. So I'll be walking around. Tom will be walking around. Aaron is over here. I think Scott's going to walk around as well. So if you have questions or comments, we're happy to be a resource over the course of the next hour or so. So with that said, you can get to it. Thank you.
You can write in things that aren't.
First thing you don't want to sort of name tags,
Yeah, I mean, years ago.
Has everybody at their individual tables wrapped up the table work? Are there any tables that are still wrapping? Almost done? What I'd like to do as this one more table finishes up is give every table facilitator a chance to come up to the microphone, the one that's working for the entire room, and just say one thing from your table, the most interesting thing, the most surprising thing that you heard, and share that back out with the group. So looking for the table facilitator from each of these tables to come up and share one thing. Bill, do you want to start and come on up? Hey, Bill. Bill, you're next to come share one thing.
Hi, I'm Tread McIntyre, and I wanted to share our table's thoughts on the municipal actions for economic development. We had a pretty lively discussion, but there seemed to be a lot of interest that sort of coalesced around the more apartments and multi-unit housing for support workers. We allocated almost half of our $100, $45 to that, and then shared the rest of it was split between. We had 25 for the working waterfront initiatives. We allocated 10. Outdoor recreation was a very popular topic for our group. We put 10 towards that, including the Royal River Waterway, and then 10 each on support for entrepreneurs and collaboration on shared workspace. Anybody from our table want to add to that? No? Yeah, sure.
One thing, we don't like art. Oh, excuse me, wait a minute. I didn't phrase that properly. We weren't high on the creative economy. That's our one thing. We had a lot of other good stuff, but that was our most surprising thing, yes. So that.
We were about the creative economy. So we found public transportation to be a big topic at our table. My man Tim over here brought up a good point of a light rail concept to kind of drive people in and out of Yarmouth and those that living in Yarmouth to take advantage of local communities and still come back home. Broadband and internet was a big deal. I think that goes hand in hand with the ability to keep workers here, shared workspace, stuff like that. Your software and your hardware have to be in tune. Entertainment, obviously, I kind of prefaced that. And then festivals, I think in terms of local events to bring the community together. I know Tim over here mentioned about, or Chris mentioned about getting to know your neighbors. That's a great way to kind of loop everyone together, and it doesn't have to be just exclusive to the Clam Festival. So, and then really a few bucks to small businesses in rural and residential areas, and then about $10 over to entrepreneurs. But yeah, creative economy was definitely a hot topic.
We had a really fun table. We just wanted to recreate, so we have a lot of indoor and outdoor recreation ideas around agritourism, and just keeping people in Yarmouth playing and going to events and having the opportunity to spend their dollars here. So we also talked about the working waterfront, and so we would put some money towards that to make sure that access and safe access and making sure there's a lot of ability to, like, for instance, have a full service restaurant on the water that you can bring your boat up to, which we don't have a lot of that. So, Sunset Cruises, exactly. So you should have joined our table. There's a lot of great ideas around indoor and outdoor recreation and family activities. So, anything you guys would like to add?
All right, I'm adding on the fly here. I think we spent the most of our time looking at the types of businesses that we might like to see added to town. And it seems like we have a fair number of foodies on our table. Full-service restaurants, both kind of medium-priced, reasonably priced ones, and destination restaurants maybe, which would bring people in from off the highway. A couple quick service restaurants, especially ones that are open on weekends, because some of the ones we have, like Clayton's, aren't open on the weekends, and Maples wasn't open on the weekends when it was here. Some boutique clothing stores, and places to buy underwear, somebody mentioned. So you don't have to go to Rennie's, yes. All right. And other things that were mentioned was urgent care for people and also for animals. We're going to lose our veterinary center. Then there's other things hanging out there is Wyman for recreation use, among other things, hopefully, and also daycare. We'll probably need more daycare to support the economy. On let's see. Where do we spend our clam dollars for economic development? The big winners were workforce housing, public transportation, incubator and shared workspace, and all the other ones were fairly small, but just about everything got some votes or dollars. On the third one, a number of things we thought were probably pretty well covered already. There wasn't support for a percent for art tax fund, figuring that in our town people can give privately for art-related things, and every once in a while EDAB gets a request for TIF money, and the town council gets asked for some money here and there for certain things. Event space seemed, especially with 317 opening, seemed primarily okay. There might be a possibility for some more studio space. The visual and performing art classes for kids are probably pretty well covered by our great performing arts programs in the schools. For adults, possibly could use a little bit more. We've got the Artiscope programs going on, and community services does do some art programs as adult education. Nice to have public art installations, sidewalk vendors, but maybe not on the sidewalk, somebody said. Music festivals, art fairs. You've got the juried art fair at the Clam Festival, and Artiscope does some, so reasonably okay. And then the other things we mentioned was just, in a certain sense, farmers markets creative, and also a community center, just so that people can have a place to get together and maybe do some creative things among other social activities. So that's about it.
Quick comment. One thing that we did mention in our group that I forgot to mention is marketing. Town has to get better at marketing, promotion, advertising, and that's a big thing that's been on the agenda. A rallying cry on the data board, on a place that the community can understand what they can do, what they have access to, what's coming down the pipe, development, festivals, that thing.
So,
exceed
marketing, yeah, comments for the folks at home are around marketing and doing a better job of communicating events and those kinds of things. So we do have a few minutes for a couple questions. I see Bill. Is it allowed? Is it quite? I think as the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Committee, you have a certain amount of latitude to make a few comments.
Well, I already made my one comment, but we thought we deserve at least two, given the other that we've heard. So our other key finding was Yarmouth needs a diner, a breakfast place. All right, that's it.
So are there any? I really do appreciate the highlights from the table work. It'll be really interesting to go through that in more detail. Are there any other final comments? Tom is still here with us. Scott's here in the back. Aaron and I might be a resource for certain. Any other final questions? I see one. I'm going to grab the microphone. Aaron will grab the microphone.
I have a question for Camoin. There was comparison to our neighboring communities, but one that was left out was Falmouth. And I was wondering whether that was included in a broader study, whether you have those numbers as well, and if there was a reason to leave it out.
Are you talking about a specific data point? Oh, yeah, a question about leaving out Falmouth and data comparisons?
We'd be interested in knowing more about their housing. I know that wasn't as much what you were. Camoin did Camoin do housing? No, you were on the economic part of it, but also comparing other stats that we were looking at neighboring communities. What about Falmouth compared to us?
I believe we included Falmouth in a lot of comparisons. There might be some specific in the market analysis.
Yeah, maybe Cumberland County. Maybe while you're turning on there's a request to have you turn your microphone back on.
Oh, I think I turned it on.
It is. Thank you. Okay, great. It's not
oh yeah. Trying to remember what the reasoning there was. That's a good question. I think we had selected those communities for.
No, I didn't see Falmouth on that particular slide. I'm quite certain, and we can verify this in a moment, maybe following up on this, that Falmouth is included. I think it was in at least a certain number of those economic comparisons.
I guess one thing I'd like to point out in comparing Yarmouth to Freeport, Cumberland, and Falmouth, we do not have the land that those communities have to develop. So that kind of limits some of our opportunities, I believe.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Comment that Yarmouth has a much smaller land area than some of the surrounding communities, so that limits development potential. Absolutely.
You're correct. I agree. We don't have that, but we also have a village that we used to be an industrial powerhouse years and years ago. So it really is very different in the sense of our housing styles are different. Our Main Street is different. We actually have a Main Street. So we don't have land, but we have a dense towns in Maine,
right? Just a comment that while Yarmouth is small in size, it does have the downtown asset, which is unique kind of in the region, and it's a dense community, so it's kind of a different development style than some of the surrounding areas.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us on this very, very rainy night. We're 2 for 2 with rain for these community conversations. So here's hoping that October 2nd has a beautiful evening for us. So thank you to the North Star Planning Team, Camoin Associates, the members of the Economic Development Advisory Board that helped us out this evening, and of course our Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, and to our Sean on the video and Patriot Insurance. If you're looking to learn more about the process, please check out planyarmouth.com. If you were unable to join us on the housing night, those activities are duplicated online now, and you can watch the recording and get up to speed on that. We would love your participation online. Look for this one to be posted probably within the week as well. Bruce, do you have a question?
Is there not a draft version of the comprehensive plan posted?
Not yet.
Not yet. It's been so just EDAB and planning board and all. I have it. It's not out for. I thought it was out for public comment.
Yeah. So that the question was about the draft comprehensive plan. So the inventory chapters have been out for public comment, but a full document of the draft comp plan will be available early next year. So in January or so, 2024, and that will be circulated for extensive public comment. But you can access the inventory chapters online, and if you can't find them, just let me know and I can send you a link. Yeah, Lee?
Would you mind having the comp plan people stand?
Oh, sure.
There wasn't involved on that.
So if you're all mine, the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee members stand up real quick. This is a small group of them. We're a group of about 17. And if you want to, check out any of our meetings, we meet on the 4th Tuesday of the month at the Town Hall Community Room. And we really appreciate their volunteer service. I know there's a lot of volunteers that are in the audience right now, and can't thank you all enough for volunteering your time for the support of the town. So with that, I will close it for this evening, and hope that everyone, yes, Deb?
When I was going to talk about the Economic Development Advisory Board, it ran over, so we decided we would, but I was going to acknowledge the Economic Development Advisory Board because people are very interested in this topic. So if I could have everyone stand up that is on the Economic Development Advisory Board, Tim's on it, Bruce is on it, Chris is on it, and our council liaison. Scott's our executive director for that work. But anyway, I just wanted you, so if you see us around town, we'd love to get feedback from you all.
And the Economic Development Advisory Board meets on the first Tuesday mornings of the month at the Town Hall, and you're welcome to join those meetings as well and learn more about their activities. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Please drive safe and check out planyarmouth.com for more information.